Or there was a time when I went to go purchase a car and I saw the price that was listed on that car. We agreed on a price with the salesman and thought everything was good to go. So we went in the back in the office to go fill out all the paperwork. And as he's tabulating stuff, he's adding on transaction fees and warranties and all these other things getting added on. And before I knew it, it was several $100s or even $1,000 or so getting tacked onto the price of that car that I was not expecting, or was unpleasantly surprised to say, right? And so we're going to talk about some of the costs that are typically associated with buying a home so that you aren't surprised or blindsided when that becomes the case. I'm also going to take you through kind of a real world example and just walk you through some of the charges that took place or were on the statement when I purchased my own home a few years ago. Welcome to the Home Goals Podcast, the ultimate guide for turning your home goals into a reality. I'm your host, Derek Thornton. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of obtaining a home. We'll be offering expert tips, helping you avoid pitfalls, and championing your journey towards that cherished place to call home. In this week's episode, we'll be answering the question, what are closing costs and how much are they? Closing costs are one of those things that kind of get lost in the shuffle when it comes to home buying. Usually when buyers are thinking about purchasing a home, they think about the house, the price of the house itself, and the down payment. Those are the two main things they're thinking of, and they often aren't aware of the closing costs. And if they are aware of them, they're not even sure how much to estimate or how much they could be. And it becomes a surprise, right? It's kind of a sticker shock. I don't know about you all, but my very first job was a traditional W-2 job where I was working at McDonald's. I was getting paid a whopping $5.25 an hour. And I remember I had worked there for about 20 hours one week, and this was going to be my first paycheck that I officially got. And so in my head, I went and got my calculator, took $5.25, multiplied by 20, and figured, okay, that's what I'm going to make in my check. And then I got it and was quickly brought into the world of taxes, right? And I saw what I actually made after all the taxes were taken out and was quite disappointed, right? You probably had that experience yourself or have a similar story. Or there was a time when I went to go purchase a car and I saw the price that was listed on that car. We agreed on a price with the salesman and thought everything was good to go. So we went in the back in the office to go fill out all the paperwork. And as he's tabulating stuff, he's adding on transaction fees and warranties and all these other things getting added on. And before I knew it, it was several $100s or even $1,000 or so getting tacked onto the price of that car that I was not expecting, or was unpleasantly surprised to say, right? And so we're going to talk about some of the costs that are typically associated with buying a home so that you aren't surprised or blindsided when that becomes the case. I'm also going to take you through kind of a real world example and just walk you through some of the charges that took place or were on the statement when I purchased my own home a few years ago. The numbers are kind of outdated, but I want to really drive home the point that it's not just a matter of whatever the purchase price is and your down payment, and that's all you have to worry about. There's a lot of other things and factors that go into it. And so closing costs, it's kind of an umbrella term, right? It includes a lot of other things. You can have 5 different buyers buying the exact same price house, right? It could be 5 different buyers buying a $300,000 home, and the closing costs on each of those transactions, even if they all had the same loan and the same down payment, their closing costs could be completely different based on the buyer. There are some things that are dependent on the type of home that you're purchasing, right? It could be the area that you're in. If it's in a different county where the taxes may be a little bit different, there's all kinds of factors that can go into and change the amount of closing costs. There's also things that are included in there that are sometimes optional. For example, in our area, a survey is optional. That could drastically change it, maybe by several $100s, what your closing costs are going to be, whether or not you decide to get a survey. Those are going to be the things that have to factor in and you have to decide, but you can't just go off of what necessarily your friends told you, right? If your friend said, oh, well, here's what I paid in closing costs for my house, you can't just always take that number and run with it and assume it's going to be the exact same for you. I have all different buyers with all different loan types, and even the most similar of deals, there's always a little bit of difference in what their closing costs are going to be. Closing costs can include everything from attorney fees, lender fees, right? The lender isn't just loaning you several $100,000 out of the goodness of their heart. They want to get paid for that as well, and they want to get paid for originating and putting the work together to create that loan. So they're going to charge you to do that. There's all these other little fees that go into it as well. And like I said, we'll go through those or some examples of what they look like. But I want you to understand that it's not just a matter of the basic nuts and bolts of how that all works out, right? So it's a lot of different costs that come together to make those closing costs happen. Now, again, we're always trying to work off of averages to get a general idea. And so obviously the first question that people ask often is, okay, well, a general range or an estimate, what would we typically expect to see with closing costs? I tell people it can usually be maybe, depending on the price of the house, maybe a couple percent, maybe like 2 or 3% of the purchase price, depending on, like I said, what the deal is. And so, like I said, if you were buying a $300,000 house, it would not be uncommon for you to have closing costs that were anywhere from 6,000 to 9,000 or some cases, right? So again, it could be higher than that. Sometimes it could be a little lower than that, but that's about a general range. And like I said, we'll go through an example so you can kind of get a feel for what cost that you may need to account for. As we've talked about in some past episodes, one of the best ways for you to get a really accurate idea or a really accurate estimate of what your closing costs could be is to have a discussion with a lender and have them do what's called an itemized loan worksheet, right? You want to have a itemized loan estimate where it breaks down the costs. And you also want to have someone who is working locally in your area. Right. And so you would prefer to work with someone like if you live in the Raleigh area, like I do as well, you would want to work with a lender who is familiar with deals or transactions happening in Raleigh, because they're going to know, here's what our attorneys typically charge. Here's what we typically see in the fees and stuff like that. They have a better feel or a grasp or understanding on that, because as I always say, real estate is hyper local. So you can't just go based off of what someone else is paying in a different state. Those costs can vary, right? And so you want to talk to a lender, come up with an itemized loan estimate. Again, it's not going to get it down to the penny. It's not going to there could be several factors that change based on the particular or the specific house that you decide to purchase, but they can usually get you pretty close, right? They can tell you like, hey, if you, in today's world, with what the houses are priced at in this general area, here's what you could see. And that's going to give you the best idea of what your goals need to be when you're saving. So like I said, we're going to go through an example, and I'm going to take you guys through, I have it pulled up here right now, but I'm going to take you through what we have called, or what we use in our business. It's called the ALTA settlement statement. Right. So it's a settlement statement that lists out all the fees and expenses. You might have also heard it called a closing disclosure. Closing disclosure basically has the exact same figures and numbers as this settlement statement that I'm about to read. It's just done in a different format. It's what most lenders traditionally use. More attorneys, especially the ones out here, usually prefer a settlement statement because they like the way that the numbers line up and it makes it easier to read and explain to people. But I'm going to read you through the settlement statement for when I purchased my home. We purchased in 2021. And so some of these figures are going to be a little outdated. But again, I just want to give you a general idea of what you can typically expect to see, right? So in this particular settlement statement, we have one column for all the debits, right? So all the debits are the things or the charges that I have for this deal. And then the credit side, these are all the things that are being credited to me. Now, they could be things that I already paid earlier in the transaction that I'm just getting credit for at the end, or it could be also money that the lender is giving me to be able to purchase this house. But the debits are all of my expenses. The credits are the things that are coming in or being credited to me to reduce the total amount that I have to bring to the closing table. Right. And so the sales price on here was $266,000 to give you an idea of that. So that shows up in the debit. Right. That's what I have to provide to the seller. The majority of that obviously was coming from the lender, and we'll show where that goes. So I'm just going to go through the debits and then talk briefly about the credits as well. So the debits, like I said, $266,000 is the amount that I have to, with the help of the lender, be able to provide to the seller at the closing table. That's the first debit that's listed on here. The second one, HOA dues. So what they do is they will typically prorate the HOA dues, right? So let's say, for example, you pay your HOA dues quarterly. That's how our neighborhood does them, right? And let's say they were, $90 a quarter for that particular HOA or anything like that. If the closing is happening at the end of the second month in that quarter, then the seller, when they pay that, they will have the HOA, they'll be responsible for the HOA dues for those first 2 months when they lived in the home. That last month in the quarter, I'm going to have to step in as the buyer and pay that difference, right? And so this one, I had to pay $30 towards HOA dues to cover the time that I would be in there before the next billing period happens. The next fee that's on there is the origination fee. So this is the fee that the lender charges for their services or for putting that loan together, because that's what takes the longest in this entire transaction, is that loan process happening with the origination, the underwriter checking all your bank statements, all your fees and all that stuff, and putting that loan together. That's going to be what takes the longest in the deal, and they charge you what's called an origination fee. Different lenders call it different things, right? You may see them call it different things, but origination fee, for the sake of this example, is what they called it here. That was $995. More recently, I've seen it get closer to about $1,200 or $1,300. But again, that number can vary drastically as well. That can be, I've seen it as high as 1% of the of the purchase price, right? And so that number can change dramatically. And that's also an important one to pay attention to. If you ever see a lender giving you a credit, right? If a lender says, hey, if you use us, we'll give you $5,000 in closing costs or something like that, you want to make sure that you have a breakdown of the cost that they're or the fees that they're charging, right? Because there are situations where a lender is offering you this credit that seems very appealing, but then when you really look at the numbers and look closer, you notice that they're actually charging you more than a traditional lender would charge you. And so they're not really giving you much of a discount, right? It's kind of like when you go to the store and you see like these red stickers and discounts marked down everywhere, but then you look at the original price and you realize that it's higher than what it would typically be anyway, right? It's not really a sale. That's kind of the similar process that can happen. So you definitely want to pay attention to whatever the fee the lender is charging. In this case, they charged me $995. The appraisal fee, if you're getting a loan, they're going to require you to have an appraisal. The only time they would waive that requirement is if you had a hefty down payment and they were just certain that you've got plenty, you're moving in with plenty of equity in that home. But if you have anything less than a 20% down payment, more often than not, they're definitely going to require you to have an appraisal done on that home. This one, they charge $475. It's more expensive than that now. In our area, it's typically been around maybe $500 to $600 nowadays. We've got the credit report fee, so they have to pull your credit. They charge you for that. That was $24.20. On this one, they get a flood certification to make sure that you're not in a flood zone or any of that. That was $11. They have a tax service fee, right? You notice a pattern, right? All these little fees just starting to ding in, starting to add up, right? So that was $75 as well. Technology platform service fee, that was $93.25. Prepaid interest, right? And so this is the very first mortgage payment that you have. They will have that included in this statement, and they want you to pay the interest up front. And whatever that charge is going to be based on when you close in that month, right? And so if it was, I don't know, let's say $1,000 or so, if you close at the very first day of the month, you would have to pay that full $1,000 of bank interest towards that first payment. But if you closed on the last day of the month, you wouldn't have to pay anything towards that interest, which is part of the reason why you'll see so many people trying to close on the last day of the month, because they want that interest payment to be as small as possible. Now, there's always going to be some give and take with that. One of the advantages to closing early in the month is that even though your interest payment, your prepaid interest payment is higher, your first mortgage payment, your first official payment is pushed a little further out, right? And so for my prepaid interest, I had $700. That's pretty high, but that's because we closed on the second day of the month, which isn't normal, but I wanted it that way because I knew that I wouldn't have to pay my first official mortgage payment until August 1st, right? And so the mortgage, the way that it's set up, the payments are set up is that you always have a month in between there. And so if I had closed at the end of June, that first payment would have still been August 1, right? And so my interest initially up front would have been a lot smaller, but I would have had less time before I have to make that first mortgage payment, right? And so that's kind of the give and take that you have with when you decide to close. Homeowners insurance, they call it they have a section called impounds. As we talked about last week, your mortgage payment is split up into different parts, and most lenders will usually have a portion of your mortgage payment going towards insurance and a portion going towards property taxes. And they'll usually, when you initially purchase the home, they will take about 2 to 3 months of those two charges and put it into an escrow account as a cushion, right? That way they're not taking that cost all the way down to zero when it comes time to pay those bills. And so for my homeowner's insurance, they paid 3 months of it, which came out to $219. That was included as a part of my closing costs. And for my property taxes, they took another amount as well. They took the year for that front. Well, that was $2,100. And they took that to have as a cushion in that escrow account right out of the gate. Title insurance with the lender, that was $527, right? And so that's making sure that I have clean title on that property or on that home, and that no one can come along and say that they have a right to this property or that home. The lender, because again, it's their asset technically, want to make sure that you have some title insurance in place. Owner's title insurance was $40 on that to make sure that I was covered too. The attorney fee, that was $985. That's a little bit higher now. It's gotten closer to like the $1,000 to $1,200 in our area. But that's the attorney fees that you pay to conduct the entire transaction for you. They help handle the receiving the money. They do the title search. All those things are done by the real estate attorney, and that's a normal cost that you can typically expect to see on most transactions when you're purchasing. E-recording, $8, right? So when they record your name on the county deed, there's a charge for that as well. Recording fees, $90. And then they have also a home insurance premium that I'm paying for the entire year up front, and that was $878. Now, it's since gone up pretty significantly, but that's what it was when I originally purchased. Now, when we go to the credits side of things, there's a credit for $2,000 and also a credit for $5,000, right? So the due diligence fee, which is not common in every state, but is common in ours, the due diligence fee and the earnest money deposit, those were things that I put up at risk up front when I went under contract on the house, with the understanding that, hey, if the deal falls apart at certain points in the deal, I could lose these funds, but if the deal closes successfully, they're credited back to me. Right. And so we can always talk more about that, but those are two of the expenses or fees that you will definitely want to make sure that your lender takes into consideration, especially depending on where you're purchasing. Got $258,000 from the lender for the loan amount. And then they gave a credit as well in that particular deal. Now, sometimes the lender may give you credits and you can kind of see where things go in there, but those are the main credits that I had. And so, again, like I said, I had closing costs that totaled about, let's see, when I add these ones up, it was about $9,000 altogether. Like I said, when you take out those ones, but that also doesn't include the $5,000 and $5,000 and the $2,000 I gave in due diligence in earnest money. And so I only had to bring $2,000 to the closing table, right? So that just gives you an idea of it. And anytime you hear a seller talking about giving closing cost or a closing cost credit to the buyer, there's no real money that actually exchanges hands. What typically happens is that at the closing table, if the seller has agreed to give closing costs to the buyer, they will usually take a portion of their proceeds and credit that to the buyer for use in the transaction or in that deal, right? And so they can say, hey, we want to give $2,000 to the buyer to handle the repairs in whatever way they see fit. That doesn't mean that the seller gives the buyer a check for $2,000. It just means that their overall closing costs and everything and down payment and all that stuff is reduced by $2,000. And so that's typically how it works. But the important thing I want you to understand is that you definitely want to make sure that you always are talking with the lender, learning all the things that you need to know, because it can definitely be a surprising shock to many people when they go through the buying process. And you want to make sure that you're as knowledgeable as possible and you're ready to go every step of the way. Hopefully that was helpful for you all. Again, I'm always here to be a resource for you and point you in the right direction. But I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I'll talk to you next week.